We have a RevOps team that reports into the CFO, and I have them work on things like this all the time. It's actually one of the moves I made early on. RevOps reported to sales, and I know this is a big debate. I'm just going to throw my 2 cents in. RevOps has got too much impact to the strategic direction of some of the things you want to do in order to be reporting into a function that is generally only cares about the next quarter. You really need somebody who's looking at the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years. So that's generally not the salesperson in my experience.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. What follows is a conversation between me and Will Cureton, the CFO of Nitrogen Wealth. This is one of the most honest conversations we've ever had on the show. We hit on 2 main topics: navigating through headwinds. So what do you have to do when you revisit growth assumptions at a core level with your private equity sponsors? And mitigating churn. How do you improve customer retention over time? And how do you get to root causes of churn so you can actually pull levers tangibly within the business to change those outcomes? There are a lot of lessons here that you won't get from most leaders. So I want to applaud Will for coming on to tell his story, and props to them for turning around what could have been a problem. So all this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Annual planning season is upon us. That's right, my favorite time of year. And it's not just about setting goals for the coming year. It's about ensuring you have the right tools in place to measure and achieve those goals. As a SaaS CFO, I know having access to reliable, real-time metrics is crucial for my annual planning process. That's why I'm so excited to partner with today's sponsor, Maxio. Maxio is a billing and financial operations platform that helps subscription businesses reconcile bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, and SaaS metrics automatically. By the way, guys, bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, not the same thing. Got to get them straight. Because these numbers are the foundation of your financial models, it's important to have quick access and trust that they are correct. Don't let the complexities of SaaS finance and accounting slow you down. If you want to start 2025 with the right tools, check out Maxio by visiting maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Request a demo through our link to support the podcast, ya boy, and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. maxio.com/run the numbers. Please, guys, I really need this. Ready to take your company global? Mr. Worldwide! You'll expand your business into new countries, hire international team members, run multi-currency payroll, pay local benefits, and stay on the straight and narrow with tax compliance. Sounds like easy stuff, right? As businesses grow beyond their borders, they face a maze of regulations and logistical challenges. RemoFirst clears the path as your trusted global employer of record, enabling you to hire in over 180 countries without setting up local entities. They manage international payroll, tax compliance, and HR benefits while ensuring adherence to local employment laws in every country. Whether you're looking to make your first international hire or streamline existing global operations, RemoFirst makes global employment simple with their employer of record (EOR) service starting at $199 a month, an average of 50% less than other providers. I've seen companies grow their operations in 20 countries with RemoFirst help. You can get 2 months free on EOR fees for your first hire in any country by visiting remofirst.com/metrics. That's REMOFIRST.com/metrics. Discover how easy international hiring can be at remofirst.com/metrics. Just go to remofirst.com/metrics. Will, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having me, CJ.
I'm a bit of an internet sleuth. I've been trying to learn Nitrogen, how they play into the wealth management space. Maybe you could take just 30 seconds off the top to explain what your company does and what market it plays in.
Yeah, for sure. So Nitrogen is a firm that serves wealth management firms, providing them with a software platform that enables their financial advisors to grow their assets under management while optimizing client engagement and protecting their business. So our platform is deeply embedded in the advisor's day-to-day workflow, basically enabling them to acquire new clients, increase the satisfaction of their existing clients and their retention as a result, and then document their fiduciary responsibilities. As you know, financial advisors are heavily regulated. So there's a ton of regulatory and compliance needs. So the system does that for them as well. At the heart of our platform is an award-winning risk tolerance functionality that's built on, I'm going to geek out here for a minute. It's built on a
Go for it.
it's built on a Nobel Prize winning framework called prospect theory that was put forth by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. And basically what it does is it quantitatively measures the amount of risk of individual securities in an investment portfolio and compares that risk to the actual risk profile of the investor and identifies where there's misalignments and suggests rebalancing options, if that makes sense. In addition to that sort of risk tolerance functionality, we've built additional components to the platform in research, planning, marketing, and compliance that have built it into a more robust platform than just hitting the risk tolerance part of what financial advisors do with their clients.
Awesome. Prospect theory. Is that like the sunk cost fallacy of how when you lose something of like a similar amount of what you gain, it actually hurts more?
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. And at the beginning of the process, the prospect or the customer gets a risk tolerance survey questionnaire, which asks them exactly that. For this amount of return, how many dollars are you willing to risk? And so that helps inform the algorithm, which then produces what we call the risk number, which is, expressed at like a speed limit sign, and 0 would be cash and 99 would be, Tesla back in the day. And, you fall somewhere on that spectrum, and it helps sort of the investor understand their risk profile a little bit better, and then helps them measure that relative to each of the individual securities in their portfolio.
I took one of those surveys last week, and I like to think that I'm pretty aggressive in my head, at least with like how fast I want to go. And then it had the bar chart, Will, of like you would lose or gain this much. I'm like, oh shit, no, I don't want to lose that much. No, put that down.
Yeah, it's sort of the cornerstone of what became behavioral economics, right? It's this huge part of the behavioral finance, I should say. A huge part of what financial advisors are doing for their clients is managing that aspect of their approach to their investments.
And for the benefit of listeners, would it be safe to say that you're a vertical software or vertical provider because you're focusing on one like core niche?
That's right. Today, I think that there's opportunity for us to go beyond that. And we'll probably touch on that here in the conversation, hopefully. But yeah, I think today we are certainly vertical in the financial advisor space. But I think there's application for our tool beyond that. To just regular, not people who don't use financial advisors, for example, could find use out of a risk number, I think.
Yeah. I was excited to talk to you today because you're changing the way that the game is played for an industry that I think was overlooked for a while, and also helping people who own their own small businesses and are wealth advisors to essentially grow their book of business. I know that you guys took on some private equity backing a couple of years ago, right?
That's right. September 2021.
How did your outlook on the environment change then versus now?
Yeah, well, I think this is probably true of a lot of people, at least the ones I speak to, that the view on growth in our space has changed quite a bit. That's certainly been our experience. I think that, one of the most important things that we've done is to really fully understand our business model. So how does your company make money? How does it spend money? Historically and today, got to understand the market it operates in and how it serves its customers. Basically, look at the business and identify what risks and opportunities truly exist, both internally and externally, and then stack rank those in order of importance and or impact. And then I think the CFO in particular is in the best position to help present those to the senior leadership team and to the board so that you can get to the decisions that will matter the most more quickly. So kind of in our case, it's been that kind of a journey. And along the way, we found that some of the historical growth that we had leading up to the investment wasn't sort of sustainable, healthy growth. It was growth. Yeah. But under the covers, we had to make some decisions and actually exit some business lines for a variety of reasons. And in addition to that, we also had to rethink the way we go to market to serve the customers that we're going after and the ones that we have today. So yeah, it's been a journey. And one thing we probably overestimated was how much pricing power we had in 2022, because we went pretty nuclear with a big price increase, and that has aggravated customer dissatisfaction, actually.
There's a lot to unpack there. And first, before we dig into it, I just want to commend you on just being so honest and transparent, because there are a lot of companies out there who don't want to catalyze the reality of what's going on outside. But I think it's a brave thing to do when you take a step back and say, whoa, we had these growth assumptions. We have to revisit them.
Yeah, it's tough. There's a lot of emotions involved. Some of the people that put together the thesis are the ones you're explaining this to. So it's very delicate. But I think if you do it objectively, if you use data to inform your position, then, even the most difficult conversations, you'll be surprised with how much gratitude there is for the transparency on the back end.
Yeah. And when a company is revisiting growth assumptions, do you usually find that push is coming internally? Like there's a moment where internally in the company we're saying, we set out to do this and we're feeling some softness? Or is it more that the investors from the outside are actually realizing it and saying, guys, the landscape has changed, something here, has to give?
Well, I'm sure it's different for different companies. In our case, it definitely came from internal. So after the PE firm took the position, we really upgraded the talent on the executive leadership team. And I think as a result of that, we found that we had a deeper understanding of the business.
And every quarter you're in the business, it's like you get a better feel of what the rhythm is for, your business model. And also like I call it the micro macro, but it's like the macro of the business environment that you specifically operate in. So for you, it'll be wealth advisors, and you start to pick up these patterns each quarter that further update your own thesis on where the business is going.
For sure. And when you think about, expanding TAM, there's a ton of different opportunities out there that you have to spend a lot of time, researching and really making sure that your approach to them are correct before you start dipping into them, because you don't want to waste time. I remember we're on a PE schedule, so we have a certain amount of time that we need to get this done in.
When you revisit growth assumptions, a lot of that is assessing TAM, right? Like we thought this would be a core customer, but maybe it's not the right fit. Or is it, we thought it was, 200,000, shops that we could go after, or wealth advisors we could go after. But, the number actually, when you dig into it, is only 100,000. Yeah.
So in our industry, we're fortunate because everybody has to be registered with FINRA, and as a result,
man, I'm jealous. You know where the bodies are buried.
Right. We can get pretty deep into TAM analysis with respect to financial advisors. Where it gets a lot murkier is when you're going to go beyond financial advisors and think about attacking corporates or other potential strategic partners that exist in the space. That becomes much more difficult.
Got it. And I wanted to point out to listeners at the beginning that you operate in a vertical space, or, focusing at least initially on this one ideal customer profile, because something that vertical software companies often run into is TAM constraints. And that's why very early on, investors say, hey, you got to go multi-product, because we know there's only so many out there that you can go after. Yeah, exactly. And that's been our experience. So our company has been serving financial advisors actually since 2013. And given that there's a finite amount, a number of them in the US, which is where we operate, and we know who they are, over that time frame, we've seen many of the ones that we were going after have seen us or are aware of us. And even within that, there are really two segments that we really target, which are broker dealers and registered independent advisors. So less so among bigger firms like a Goldman or even banks and insurance firms, but more so like the Cetera, LPL, that kind of an operation. So we're certainly operating in a constrained addressable market relative to what our growth ambitions are. And we've been spending a lot of time over the last few years working on expanding that constrained TAM. And one big trend in our industry, I'm sure this is true in many others, is consolidation, driven mainly by PE investment. So we identified that early on. And to capitalize on that trend, we've been building more firm-wide capabilities into our product. A big example of that would be the compliance functionalities that I mentioned earlier. And the thinking there is that helps us better position the product fit for a larger firm where we can capture more share quickly. Not to mention the more attractive attributes that are associated with larger enterprise deals. The trade-off, though, of course, is that sales cycles are a lot longer, and typically these will require a decent amount of implementation work that, if not managed correctly, can become a big customer and churn issue down the road. So we spend a lot of time focusing on executing those aspects of that strategy. The same applies to when we're trying to penetrate markets like banks and insurance,
companies, which have their own really tricky, unique business and regulatory requirements. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how to best approach these things, and have had varying levels of success depending on the market.
You can either speak to your company or just generalize based on observations. But when companies go to revisit growth assumptions, do you think that the input that they're toggling is usually the time to land the customer or the number of customers that they can actually get?
I think in our experience, it's been the number of customers.
Okay.
Our sales cycles are pretty predictable depending on the segment that we're going after. I should say the ones that we're operating in, the ones that we're exploring, banks and insurance and others, they could be very different.
I have a friend who says that, this certain customer segment, it may be delayed, but it'll never be denied. Eventually they'll stop using pen and paper and, they'll go to ordering, say, parts online. So for that, it's the timeline of when you get them. But then I've also had, friends at other companies that said, listen, we thought there were, Uber's example, X amount of taxi cabs in the market. It was actually way more, or maybe it's way less, depending on how you slice it.
Yeah, and I think we have both of those, but I think the bigger opportunity for us is actually the more customers, because if we can tap markets that are outside of financial advisors, the numbers stack up pretty quickly. Like if we could attack the 23 million people using Robinhood, for example, that don't use a financial advisor, well, what could that mean?
But therein lies the rub, right? Well, because then you have to staff more resources to go and get them, right? It may not be the same type of salesperson or the same type of marketing motion or marketing program budget that you thought for the initial group.
Indeed, yeah. My approach generally when entering a new TAM is to be a little bit more cautious, which I know is not always the most popular approach, but I do think that some small amount of testing is totally appropriate. And actually, oftentimes it helps you avoid wasting time and effort when there isn't a lot of either available. Yeah. But at a minimum, I think it will help sharpen your approach. And the reality is that there's always going to be things in your initial analysis that you didn't get right. So the best teacher is experience.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. As a CFO, I can say firsthand that the most important thing to know is how money enters and leaves the building. Full stop. Without a simple and easy to monitor financial system, you're flying blind. And I'm the kind of guy who likes to have all my tools in one place. I'm talking checking accounts, bill pay, credit cards, and everything else I need to run a business. I'm pumped that Mercury is both a sponsor of this podcast and a safe place to keep my cash. It sure beats keeping my cash under my mattress again. Plus, it looks slick. I always get angry when back office tools are ugly. Newsflash. Finance people may wear both a belt and suspenders to work, but we like stuff that looks good too. Sorry, I just had to get that off my chest. Mercury simplifies your financial operations with powerful banking, giving you greater control, precision, and speed so you can operate at your best. Make the switch today, like I did. Tell them your boy CJ from Run the Numbers sent you. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Banking Trust. Members FDIC. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. Bull market, bear market. Rates will rise, rates will fall. Can someone please just invent a crystal ball already? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their companies with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. Whether you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If you listen to this podcast, you'll know I ask CFOs all the time to rep their tech stacks, and I would say almost every one of them use NetSuite. And that's what I would use too. Whether you're a company earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/metrics. The guide is free to you. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, it's netsuite.com/metrics. Please, guys, I really need this. Being an operator is not for the faint of heart. It often feels like you're jumping out of an airplane and building the parachute on your way down. CEOs, CFOs, COOs, and BizOps leaders feel my pain. That's why I joined Operators Guild. It's home to more than 1,000 of the most elite, high-growth operators in the world. Think the Special Forces for business scale. Members have access to over 150 in-person events across all 25 global chapters. The modern startup founder, CFO, and COO are really just multidisciplinary problem solvers, which is why having the best problem solvers together has created the ultimate diversity intelligence of any operator group in the world. Operators Guild gave me the chance to meet my own personal board of directors, people I can bounce ideas off of, and their online forum allows you to get answers from your peers as questions pop up. Like, how do I run an employee secondary? Or what should I pay as a base commission rate on SaaS deals? I've made great friends through attending their highly acclaimed OG Summit and frequently attend their online masterclasses taught by the best tech operators in the business. Join Operators Guild and access the Navy SEALs of high growth business scaling, a group built by operators for operators. Learn more and apply at operators-guild.com. That's operators-guild.com, and tell them CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Would you mind expanding upon that to make it more real for the listeners? Do you carve out, say, X dollars within a marketing budget and say, hey, listen, man, this is your experiment budget, go get it? Or do you say, I'm going to greenlight 2 BDRs to try to call into these accounts? What do you do?
Yeah, there's a whole financial business case model that supports each one of these efforts. That includes everything from top line expectations through serving the customer, marketing, back office support, the whole nine. Those are prepared and reviewed both by senior leadership team and the board before we actually execute them. And usually they include some kind of a testing period up front where we can have a fail-safe and say, look, it didn't pan out. Let's not waste too much more time on this and let's move on to something else.
I'm glad you elaborated on that, because I have, always heard, let's run an experiment against it. But there's no really such thing as like experiment in a box. And what I've also noticed is that there sometimes isn't like a closing of the feedback loop of like, we ran this experiment and it didn't pan out. People seem to get pretty quiet when that's the answer from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have to hold yourself accountable and do a postmortem if you decide to move off of something and learn from it. Otherwise, it was a complete waste of time.
Maybe another question on TAM. Well, how do you know the right amount of resources to staff against selling into it? And how do you avoid burning through your TAM? Because if it is constrained by just how many are out there and it's a known number, within a city, I mean, you could probably staff 3 BDRs and they could rip through it within a 6-month period if you really wanted them to.
Yeah. Well, we're tracking, especially in the testing period, but even in the operational period, we're testing the productivity metrics of all of the different, functional teams that are supporting the effort to make sure that we're fully optimized. And we're constantly making tweaks to that, right? You're just not going to know what the right number is all the time. So you make your best educated guess, and then I think, iterate and tweak from there has sort of been our approach.
Anecdotally, I heard about MindBody, who serve, gyms and spas and salons, and they got to a point where the leads just kept going back into a bucket for people to call upon. And it got so bad that, gyms were saying, no, we don't want it. But there weren't any more to call at that point, that the BDR just kept calling and calling and calling until there were complaints against them, basically for harassing them, because they ran out of, I guess, prospects within that year, and everybody still wanted to hit their numbers.
Yeah, it's like a Glenn Ross movie.
Totally. I want to touch on exiting unsustainable business lines, because there are many people listening to this right now who are probably looking at a P&L and saying, listen, that dog didn't hunt last year. We got to move off that corner. What are the steps that go into exiting a business line in a graceful way, and also a way that makes financial sense for the company?
Yeah. So, right. So I mentioned fully understanding the business model. The same applies to the business line, right? It's the same exact approach. Yeah. And we actually did that kind of analysis, and it helped us come to the conclusion that we were going to end the life of one of our products. So several years ago, we had introduced functionality that enabled our users to execute trades right within the system. So it was the system identified a misalignment, proposed a rebalancing option, and then now you can actually execute the trade. And it was fine, but it didn't transform the business as we thought it was going to. And, it's not free to run. Also, there's a bunch of liability risk on executing trades perfectly, which is what you need to do if you're going to execute them. So we came to the difficult conclusion that we were going to end that product's life earlier this year. So to give you an idea of the timeline, given the nature of our contracts, which tend to run annual, we announced it publicly in May of 2024 and announced that it would end at the end of 2025 to give everybody enough time to transition off of that platform and onto another. And we're actively assisting our customers with that process as we move them, as we transition them off of ours.
And that's thoughtful the way that you did the timeline and communicated it, right? Because there are existing customers who are depending on it.
Absolutely. And this is a critical thing for them to be able to run their business. And the last thing we want to do is leave a customer high and dry without a way to operate.
Yeah. I have a feeling that, they talk about zombie companies. I think there are a lot of zombie business lines at companies that are actually healthy in the aggregate, but they just don't want to come to grips with, listen, this probably it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory if we get this right. It's not a battle that we're willing to keep putting resources in to win.
Right. And it goes back to what I said earlier. If you have properly stack ranked the risks and opportunities with each of these things, and you've made a decision and aligned on these are the ones we're going to focus on, sometimes you have to make the decision that, it was good, but it didn't actually do the trick and we're running out of time. So we got to move off. So it's really that kind of a process that we went through.
Will, when you were explaining it, you didn't just hit on the revenue opportunity, you hit on the liability and risk surface area. You as the CFO, is that something you put your hand up and said, listen, it's not just about the sales we can make, it's also what we're exposed to?
Absolutely. And to credit our CTO, he also acknowledged the same thing. And, it's just not worth, if you mess up on one trade, it could be so devastating, not only from a actual dollars out the door from a liability perspective, but just from a reputational perspective. In our industry, it's just not where you want to be. So yeah, we were raising the flags on that. But I think the CFO sits in the bird seat of the organization from a risk management perspective. You kind of have to. So yeah, it's your responsibility to speak up when you see something like that.
Got it. We talked about exiting a business line. Maybe we can touch on unbundling the bundle. There are a lot of companies out there who are juggling what to do with product lines, and sometimes it's bundling, sometimes it's rebundling. How have you thought about putting products together or separating them?
Right. So I mentioned a little bit about how our product is constructed earlier with the risk, the planning, the marketing, and the compliance and research components. And what ended up happening is over time we had a bundled plan effectively, which had a relatively high price point associated with it. I mentioned the price increases that we did earlier. And so we had this price to value mismatch. And so for us, we decided that we were going to unbundle our products into more discrete functionalities that they could buy at a lower price point for the smaller customers. And for our larger customers, we switched from a seat-based pricing model to a usage-based pricing model to better align their price to value equation. And, we think that so far we just announced it in July, and so far it's been really good. Instead of having a bundled product that includes functionality that is perhaps not as important to a specific customer, they now have the optionality to buy a product that serves their specific need at a lower cost. Not only does that help us, we think, with acquiring new business, but also we have a huge book of business that had us at one time. Remember, we've been around for a long time, that we can actually go back and sell into with this new unbundled product. So we're quite excited about it.
This analogy is probably terrible, but much in the way we interviewed the CFO, Scott of Spirit Airlines, and much in the way that you can go a la carte with certain things like, yeah, I still want to take that flight, but maybe I don't want to check a bag for it. You can go back to customers and better align to whatever the value they want to get out of the product is by unbundling it, because sometimes companies do get over their skis with trying to force everything that they do good into one kind of basket of goods, but they forget that the end customer really only cares about one thing within that.
That's exactly right. And we found early indication that the price to value mismatch is no longer as big a concern among our customer base as it once was.
What is a price to value mismatch? Is that basically saying I get value out of it, but you're charging too much?
That's basically what it is.
And you experienced that?
We did.
What were the key drivers in kind of mitigating the churn that came out of it? Because it sounded like people voted with their feet to a certain extent.
Yeah, well, the big response was the unbundling for sure. Now, we understand that may result in a downsell of some customers, but you have to realize that, having a customer at a higher price point that is likely to churn doesn't have as an attractive GRR or LTV profile as a customer at a lower price point that is going to stay. So that's the calculus that we did, and we're confident that that's actually the right solution for us. It may not be the same for all other companies, but certainly in our case, we think it makes the most sense.
So it sounded like price discrepancy versus value was one thing. Did you Did you go deep into all the different reasons that customers churned when this came up? I imagine it didn't just stop at that. It's let's figure out the other drivers as well.
Absolutely. We spent a ton of time digging into the drivers of churn. In addition to the price to value issue, we identified issues related to unavailable data integrations, stalled customer implementations, all the regular stuff. So the process actually started over 2 years ago when I started. We developed a churn metric for the company to track. So essentially, we called it a churn score initially. And that was basically a percentage chance that an account would churn over the next 12 months. And it utilized a machine learning algorithm that was trained on over 50 feature inputs. And it quickly became something that we relied on in our operational processes. And we found that it was useful for stack ranking the churn risk, but it wasn't very helpful in letting us know why the customer is at risk. So we built on it, and we built something called the health score, which is based on 5 pillars: product usage, customer requests for support interactions, customer NPS scores, contact frequency, and account receivable attributes. And we're in the process of refining that methodology now for each of those and standing up operational processes. But the idea is that these will help proactively identify where there's an issue. And then we can decide whether or not we go address it proactively with some kind of a strategic approach before we wait for the customer to come to us with a notice of cancellation or some kind of downsell request.
That's amazing. So do you put this in the hands of your salespeople, or is it like the marketing team gets this too for air cover? Like, how do you mobilize this?
It's fully integrated into our Salesforce CRM. So when a customer care rep or an account management rep pulls up an account, first thing they see is the churn score. And then they can dig in and look into the health score and actually dig right into the tickets if necessary. And it's all kind of really deeply integrated into their workflows.
Do you think coming up with a churn score is something that is unique to your business at Nitrogen, or do you think other companies could do it as well?
I think anybody could do it if you have the right set of KPIs to track and you have the systems in order to feed the machine learning algorithm. But I've done things like this at other companies, not as tech enabled, more Excel enabled by financial analysts. But the idea of sort of stack ranking KPIs in order to give you an understanding of your relative health of either your customers or your locations is something that I've used a few times in my career. I found it to be quite useful. What it ends up doing is helps you identify where there's opportunities and then gives you ideas of actually how to close it in some cases if you build it the right way.
And it probably goes beyond churn, right? Let's look at the bright side of this, that it probably highlights expansion opportunities as well.
1,000%. It identifies where people are utilizing the product more than they probably should or are ready for some kind of an upsell because they've poked around in a certain part of the product that they don't have access to but are interested in. All that stuff is fed into the account management reps as well.
And is this built by an internal BI team?
Yeah, we have a RevOps team that reports into the CFO. And I have them work on things like this all the time. It's actually one of the moves I made early on. RevOps reported to sales. And I know this is a big debate. I'm just going to throw my 2 cents in. RevOps has got too much impact to the strategic direction of some of the things you want to do in order to be reporting into a function that is generally only cares about the next quarter. You really need somebody who's looking at the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years. So that's generally not the salesperson in my experience. So that's why we did that.
This is good. We talk about this all the time on the show. Can you go deeper on that? So sales, you're saying, is probably, as Vin Diesel would say, living life a quarter mile at a time here. Whereas you have a long-term view on where you need to take the company in terms of top line goals and value?
Yeah, well, it comes down to, like most things, money, right? They're incentivized to hit their quarterly goals. I'm not talking about generally always the CRO, but even the CRO sometimes is more heavily skewed towards their quarterly results than they are to their annual results.
Incentives drive outcomes.
That's exactly right. And so if you're going to incentivize somebody to worry about a short-term outcome, then they're going to be concerned with short-term outcomes no matter what.
And so RevOps finds a home under the office of the CFO. What's nice about that as well is it also houses the data probably from production, from sales, your CRM, and then also from the financial systems all in one place.
That's right. It enables our data and analytics on the FP&A side. It enables strategic decision making. It's massively important for us.
That's a spicy one. Everyone at home, bring some milk. Just another point around churn. Any surprising insights that came from all the analysis that you did? Anything that changed just your mind on how you think about keeping customers happy and around?
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned this before. I just think that we overestimated how much pricing power we had back in 2022 when we did this. And in retrospect, we might have been better served to raise prices more moderately at that time and perhaps introduce this unbundled offering a bit earlier. I do have an example of a churn prevention strategy that just didn't work, or as we've struggled with, which is finding the right balance of coaching and training support that we should deploy across both new and existing customers. What we found is that a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work. You really need to differentiate that across the different customer segments, and sometimes even deeper than segment. You really got to understand the CAC if it's a new customer, and or the GRR profile of the ones that are actually utilizing the coaching versus the ones that aren't, and things like that. So we've struggled with finding that right balance. And I'm not sure we have it completely figured out, but I think it's better now than it used to be.
You said finding the right balance, and this kind of ties into it, but how do you think about finding the right metrics? Because I imagine I once had the SaaS dashboard, Will, where I would track 17 different types and cuts of renewal or retention. But at the end of the day, it was like, board only cared about two of them, right? It was net dollar retention, gross dollar retention, gross within the month. So like, are you at 98.5%? And then net dollar retention for the trailing 12 months to, account for seasonality. What metrics do you track internally at Nitrogen to make sure you're on top of churn and you know everything that's possible?
Yeah, for sure. GRR is probably principal among those. GRR, NRR, LTV. We're looking at CAC. We're looking at all of the standard SaaS metrics, magic numbers, all that stuff, rule of 40. But I think that you're right. The board tends to focus in on a handful, and those are the ones that they're most concerned about. And we spend most of our time talking about those with the board.
You had mentioned that price increase was a big reason for churn. If you don't mind me asking, how much was the price increase in percentage terms?
It's flabbergasting. So you have to realize they were paying about $1,200 a year, and it went up to $3,600 a year. So
it tripled.
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. Well,
now to be fair, the people paying $1,200 had been paying $1,200 in some cases from the beginning of the company. So I mean, you're talking about 9 years of no price increases, and the idea was we spent tens of millions of dollars in updating the product, and we have to recoup some of that, which is fair. It's just that in retrospect, it probably should have been a little bit more nuanced.
To tie it back to the beginning of the podcast, we talked about prospect theory, Kahneman, and Severity. If there's something to be said about anchoring somebody to a cost, so even if the value is there, if I've been grandfathered in at this price, I'm going to have like this gut reaction of, whoa, I'm used to that one over there. That's
precisely been our experience.
Yeah. And I think a lot of businesses who have grandfathered in customers can take something from that. You have to ease it in over time. And I think any price increase is an increase too much to certain customers.
I agree with that. Yes.
Will, I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. This isn't a question that I usually ask people because they haven't all been to Manitoba, but you have a hilarious story about traveling up north to visit our friends in Canada. Can you break that one down for me?
Yes, I'm happy to. Manitoba is great, by the way. So I once worked for a company that manufactured fishing tackle, so bait, line, rods, and reels. And we had a location in Canada in Portage-la Prairie, which, as you said, is in Manitoba. And the CFO, who was my boss, sent me and the analyst that reported to me there to meet with the GM. And it was February. Now, to get to Portage-la Prairie, you fly into Winnipeg, and you drive about an hour west. The night we arrived,
is this with sled dogs, or how are you transporting your suitcase?
We should have used sled dogs, because when we arrived in Winnipeg that night, it was negative 30 degrees with the wind chill. And so I've never been so cold in my whole life. And then the next morning we drove from Winnipeg to Portage-la Prairie in the middle of what was probably a blizzard. And of course, I'm driving. We hit a patch of black ice on the highway. We did a full 180 and ended up facing traffic the wrong way. Now, thankfully, nobody else was foolish enough to be on the road at that time. So we were fine. We got back on our way without issue. And it's funny because when we got to the office, the GM is chuckling and he said, your boss must not like you very much. The company's never sent anybody here in February. So that was funny. And then we get to the town or the hotel, and there's one hotel which also serves as a neighborhood bar and a curling rink, right? And we met a couple of guys at the bar there who were local radio DJs. So they actually got us on to the radio and interviewed us back in old, radio days. They interviewed us about our business trip and what happened on our drive in. I still have the recording somewhere in my email. So, yeah.
You're a local celebrity.
Basically. It's a very small town, though. So.
I can't believe you were on the radio. They're like, a business trip. It's come to town. We have one of those.
Right. I was like a low-level manager, like a consumer products company. Yeah.
That's a hilarious story. All right. Shout out Manitoba. Please listen to this podcast. Will, give me one thing that you've messed up in your career. Could be this job or a previous one, but everyone who's successful has made a mistake or two.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, I have my share for sure. One that comes to mind because we're in the baseball playoff season is earlier in my career, I happened to come across 2 tickets to the Yankees-Mets World Series. And I realize I'm dating myself there. If anybody
was this the Subway Series?
It was. It was. Now, I'm from the Bronx originally. I'm a huge Yankee fan. I had at this time, you have to appreciate, I had been spoiled because we had been to the World Series 3 years now in a row. And so, as like a little bit of a terrible brown nose moment, I decided to gift the tickets to my boss at the time, which he was very thankful for. And I never went to that game. And suffice to say, it did nothing for my career. I ended up leaving the job in like 2 more months. And I always regretted that. So that's definitely one that I wish I never did. So the lesson there is don't brown nose.
Could you? Why? I can't believe the boss didn't invite you to go with him. Like, that's a reason enough to quit. Like,
right.
Because you're like buying a 3-hour like experience one-on-one with your boss, essentially. Like, if you're gonna brown nose, you should at least get the value out of it. That's BS.
It's the last time I ever did anything like that.
Yeah, I would have quit. Man, those tickets.
Yeah, I still kick myself about it.
Okay. Other than that, if you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell them?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I think that if you have kids, you really need to consider where your career might take you and how that can impact your family. Earlier on, I had a job, great job, that moved us to a place that just wasn't the right place for us. And, we had to correct that pretty quickly, and that was painful. So just thinking that through a little bit more deeply, I think would have been the right way to do it.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of people wrestle with that. Something that I personally wrestle with is like, where I live physically, does that impact my career opportunities in network? Yeah,
and everything's changed now with the remote work movement. But it used to be you needed to be in New York if you were gonna do things, and it's just not like that anymore. So it's just a weird time.
It is. And I think a lot of people during COVID moved to random places. Maybe there's somebody listening on a farm in Montana who used to live in New York. Will, can you take me through your finance software stack? What tools does your team use to get the job done?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm going to go a little bit outside of finance. We use Salesforce for CRM, billing, and customer care. So we're a full Salesforce shop. We use Sage Intacct for ERP, Bill.com for payables, Ramp for corporate credit card and expense management. And we use Cube for planning purposes.
Nice. Got some hitters in there. What's the most recent tool you bought?
Cube, actually. We just got on the platform in July. We got off of Adaptive, and so far we're very pleased.
It's pretty flexible, I've heard.
Very, very flexible. So far, my head of FP&A hasn't threatened to quit, so it must be good.
Nice. I've been working this one into the podcast. Are you for or against auto renewals?
Well, given that I sell them, I have to be for them, right?
Okay. All right. On balance overall, because everyone always asks me first, am I the buyer or seller? I'm like, you got to take it or leave it.
Yeah, you got to take it. Look, if you're organized, you should know when you have to put in your notice of non-renewal, and you should just do that.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about price increases, but maybe it's too soon. I think we already hit on that one.
Please don't.
All right, man. Last one I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever had someone try to expense?
Oh boy. Well, another story there. So once upon a time, I worked for a global consumer products company, and we were working on a procurement savings initiative with a huge consulting firm. And part of the targeted savings was T&E. So we provided the firm with a download of all the T&E expenses for that company and for many of its subsidiaries for like a 12-month period. I took a gander through that list. I was like project managing the project. And what I can say on this fine podcast is that there were some very sketchy things expensed. Let's leave it at that. A few of them had to be fired. And the infractions range from expensing household stuff to dates and beyond that. So it was pretty bad. So if they ask you for your download, your receipts, if you have friends, you should warn them.
Get the shredders.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this has been a blast. Thanks for the honesty, transparency, and great storytelling. This has been fun.
Thank you, CJ. I do appreciate it.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.